So I spent today plumbing to prepare for reading about the blue-collar community in the East Bay. I had a leaky toilet, so I spent the last 6 hours destroying the plumbing and then trying to bring it back up to its original state. So I now have it at a place where everything that was wrong last night is still wrong, but all the damage I did earlier today has been fixed. So, and it just seemed an appropriate way to begin talking about this book. Well, I want you to imagine that it's 1950 or 1951 or 52, and we're in the East Bay, and there's a beacon in the sky, a big light. It's the sort of searchlight that Commissioner Gordon uses to call Batman, but in this case, it doesn't signal the coming of a superhero, but rather we all know in 1950 or 51 or 52 that a new used car lot's opening, or there's going to be a new grocery store chain, or in fact, as commonly happened, there's going to be a new suburban development that is just opening its doors and beginning to sell its homes. The salesman claws the air and urges them closer. He stands astride a 1951 Ford pickup truck, polished ostentatiously to a charcoal gloss. On the collapsed rear flap of the Ford, he fans a dozen mimeographed maps to the 15 blocks of empty lots. Young couples gather around the floodlight, all of them outrageously expecting to become homeowners. Within their grasp is a new house with 3 small square bedrooms, a one-car garage, the promise of a sycamore blooming someday, out front at the edge of a postage stamp golf course green lawn. Working people never had it so good. Several men form an inquisitive horseshoe around the pickup. They still wear the Oreo-caked work clothes, and they chat among themselves, assuming a parody of experience and means, the stuff of neighborliness. And then they suspiciously demand to know more from the salesman about the availability of 30-gallon water heaters, difficult to obtain after the war, the wattage of future street lamps, the benefits and drawbacks of inclusion in the regional sanitation district. They possess ample credit thanks to the GI Bill and the FHA, and as much work these days as they desire, but they have to ask questions. 20 years earlier, working people never had it so bad. The conversation's escalating energy, its heat and zeal bring to mind a recent illustration in Time magazine. A half-page black and white diagram expounds upon the promise of atomic power, the path of speeding electrons whirring around the fundamental neutron, the implied force of the ordinary. Every man and woman gathered around the pickup truck know from experience that they shouldn't hope for much, but they cannot help themselves. A slender gold wedding band glimmers from a salesman's finger. You can't help thinking, if this character worked in a machine shop or on the factory floor, he'd have risked having that ring and finger ripped right off. One man slips both hands into the frayed pockets of his Ben Davis work trousers, climbs his thumb around the belt. Another allows his knees to sag into a boxer's stance and juts out his jaw. The salesman's canine persistence reminds folks of the bankers and nervous mortgage men who showed up at their families' farms during the Depression, the accompanying sheriff's deputy morosely rocking on his heels at the far end of the porch. Then the fancy stranger would extract from his briefcase the official papers that would turn out to be a foreclosure notice or another court order to vacate another parcel of their property. Now the world has turned upside down, and the sons and the daughters of the dispossessed are shaking the soft hand of the fellow in the white shirt and tie, more than equals, the power of the ordinary. They might even buy his house. So I grew up here. My dad worked in Alameda. I grew up in San Leandro, born in 51. And I always wanted to write about where I grew up because I thought that it never appeared in pop culture, certainly in literature, and when it does, it was misrepresented. Because it wasn't the suburbs of John Cheever short stories. It wasn't the mythical world of Leave It to Beaver. Foremost, it was an experiment. Because if we think back in the early 50s, we weren't yet what we are today, for good or ill, a suburban nation. It had just started. It was just beginning to roll across the landscape. And I remember, Clarice, maybe you remember, we grew up together, and you remember looking in your backyard. I would climb into ours as a child and peer over the redwood fence. There would be cows and horses, and there was farms there. And at the other end of the street, there was a farm. And at the other street, a farm. And the town was just a little island of concrete and tarmac that was floating in what was still a lot of green space. Really different from the suburban world we know, the California we know today, of endless development where you can't tell where one city begins, the next one starts. Levittown, of course, is the most famous suburb of the era. Levittown in New York and also in Pennsylvania. But Levittown, I have a friend who grew up there, and her dad was a college professor, and she tells me her neighbors were teachers, middle managers, doctors, lawyers. Our towns were electricians. My dad was a sheet metal worker, plumbers, could use today. People, it was unionized skilled labor, people who worked in factories, but who had a bottom rung on the new American affluence. People with educations who were part of, and middle-class jobs tended to move on. Poor people, the marginally employed, lost their grip and they disappeared.